WV Uncommon Place. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts. Along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episode. The Uncommon Place digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacey and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to our Uncommon Place.
Greetings, everybody. My name is JR Sparrow. Obviously, you get that from the intro. I know I got to work on that sometimes, you all. Today, I have an interesting guest with me, and this guest that's coming on this show has a little bit of wordplay from our uncommon place. Let's take the word common. This man that is coming on the show, he knows a lot about the common ground from the ground up. His name is Nathan Smolensky. And how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Now, growing up in Massachusetts, you grew up in a family that was deeply skeptical of socialism and government control. How did this early environment shape the way you approach politic dialogue and empathy today?
Well, that on its own, I think, is an experience that a lot of people have where their family has a one certain political identification or another. It is the conflux of that and growing up in a community where it was very much the opposite political leaning and political identity around me. And just being around both camps and from this early age, kind of seeing sort of this deep-seated partisan animosity before that became all the rage as it is today, made me aware of the nature of that conflict, the nature of just how much that conflict appeals to people's sense of community, tribe, how much it can bring out the worst of us at times, and how senseless it is at the end, in my humble opinion. And that is kind of what spurred me on to start thinking about politics differently and to start kind of trying to look at it from a different lens.
Okay, and I can understand it. Now, I come from the great state of Virginia. That's where I'm born and raised. And I learned this at an early age. I'm 40 years old now, but I learned it at the age of 5, and this was really crazy. I learned the difference, and we can go into parties like Democratic and Republican, but I didn't notice it until it came time. I was at a birthday party when I was 5 years old, and the birthday party I went to was in the upper class of the neighborhood that I lived in. And I come from middle class America, and I knew the difference between middle and lower class, but I never experienced upper class and how they thought and how they did things. And this one simple item separated every group from each other. It was a simple ice cream cake called a Vienna ice cream cake. I don't know if you remember that growing up. It was made by Breyer. And it wasn't an expensive cake, but it was something that, even in my middle class, it was something that was not a necessity. It was not something that was at a birthday party, but at this birthday party that I went to in the upper class, there were 7 of them. And these things were cut with delicate utensils. And we were eating with like full on metal utensils instead of plastic at 5 years old. From that point on, every year of the party I went to that year, and the conversations that I heard, and I know it's weird that I remember all this, the dialogue, the hierarchy that was perceived at that time, being a kid, bothered me because I didn't realize that it was all because of the political structure between where I'm from, because where I'm actually from is a town called Lynchburg, Virginia, which is very political. And you know that because I don't even have to say Jerry Falwell, and that all rings a whole bell to you about everything that goes on there. So coming from a place that should have been rooted in Democrat people, we were actually all the way down to the lower class Republican. And when Democratic feel or anyone came into in our environment, like even at these parties, it was almost like it was a social class. Like it was a difference in these people. And like you said, the bipartisan and how people were treated. I seen it the further and further I got in age, and I'm talking about just over to middle school, not even to high school, it seems like they decided that Democrat had a certain limit. Like I think at that time it was like $38,000. You're a Democrat. If you made more money than $38,000 as a single person, not as a full family, because obviously poverty level was like $14,000, $15,000 then. And may or may not be now, which means you could go into that another whole episode. But I really started to realize that hey, between these parties have made stereotypes and things that will carry on for the rest of my life. Did you experience any of that?
So, to different extents, I think divisions in class, yeah. Um, the alignment of class and politics, I would say, is very different in Massachusetts, at least in my experience in Massachusetts, because there is a sort of a puritanical liberalism or a puritanical adherence to the Democratic Party among the sort of old guard, the Kennedy old guard in
Okay.
Massachusetts, where it does sort of defy the traditional alignment of class. It's very, very left-leaning politics presented in an extremely conservative manner, if that makes sense.
Yes,
That
sir.
I always found a little off-putting, a little strange. Um, but as far as, yeah, just separation, and, we talk about politics, we talk about class, um, you know, it, we would not be the first to point out separation among people by ethnicity, by race, and uh, not necessarily by force. I remember being jarred, rather. So I come from a sort of Russian Jewish background.
Okay.
There were some of us in the Boston area where I was living. I had some friends who had similar backgrounds, similar sort of Soviet immigrant ancestry. We're first generation immigrants for the most part, not immigrants ourselves, but growing up in households where mostly Russian was spoken. But we would hang out with everyone else and definitely be in these different circles. Then I come to New York, where my cousin was living, and it's a matter of where he was in deep Brooklyn, sort of South Brooklyn. There is such a large population of Russian Jews, or eventually it would come to more sort of Soviet bloc immigrants. But it was jarring for me to see his friend group, and everyone had that same type of family background. Everyone had basically that same experiences. They're switching between languages often because everyone around has that kind of Russian background. Everyone around has that basic knowledge. It's not very, it doesn't mean it's very erudite to switch between the languages. You get this sort of Spanglish effect where it's just this blend that's unique to the group. But the fact that it was so isolated and so homogenous was extremely jarring to me. And as I came to realize later, kind of a harbinger for the way that we self-segregate among any kind of line of division in the online age, where it's no longer a need to interact so much with those who think differently from us, with those with different backgrounds from us, with those of different interests. We can kind of move more into these bubbles, and these bubbles are very convenient for businesses when people are aligned. You can target groups more effectively. Very convenient for politicians when they know if they're speaking in a certain area or speaking on a certain stage, what to expect from everyone in the audience and the sensibilities of everyone in the audience. Very, very convenient for media to kind of create, play on these bubbles and play on that separation, whether it's just, hey, you might be interested in this because you all share these kinds of attributes, or whether it's kind of playing on the alienation that starts to creep in, that the otherness of different groups, because there is a greater sense of distance there. And all that becomes very profitable. And that sort of was one of the things that kind of spurred on this idea for this book.
Okay. Now, inside this book, in Common Ground from the Ground Up, you emphasize curiosity as a solution to political polarization. What does curiosity look like in a real political conversation, especially when emotions and tensions are high? Because this is what happens to me when I get on the topic of politics. And leaving West Virginia, with my job, I travel everywhere. I'll give you a great example. I was actually in Massachusetts. I was in a little small town called Franklin, and we did a little experiment in Franklin, Mass. We went there, and in that southern part of Massachusetts, the pizzerias are a gathering place. And we went to over a week's time. Me and my wife went to 5 different pizzerias, and we just talked to people. And then talking to these people in these different places, like we were budding up for this next election or this previous election that just happened, and there was a harsh division. And the division this time was not based on political parties, but male to female. So, how do you handle these emotions, and what does that curiosity look like in a real conversation that you've had?
I think the emotion can sometimes be the outcome rather than a necessary input, rather than an inherent part of the conversation. You don't, there's a degree to which you can overcome the emotion. There's also a degree to which you can kind of not mitigate the emotion a little bit, and depends how you come into the conversation, what mentality you come into the conversation with. If you are trying to fight for what it is you believe, if you see it as conflict, then it's very, very natural to become emotional about that. It is very, very much reasonable, very much justifiable to become emotional about that, because you perceive these stakes are high, that you have to get your voice across. And the problem is that's not actually the best way to get your voice across. It's a sort of golden rule application I talk about in the book, which is if you want people to open their minds to what it is you have to say, the best thing you can do, the most effective thing you can do, is to open your mind to what it is they have to say. You do that. You start by listening. And, you're a podcast host. You exemplify listening, so you know all about the benefits that reaps. Even if the emotions are a little elevated to start, over time, you let people talk, and suddenly there's a little quiet, and there's a little calm, and there's question of, well, what do you think? And the key to setting that up, the key to being able to go to the conversation with the healthy mindset, is to appreciate just how much you can learn from someone who thinks differently than you do. To appreciate that your goal is far better served not by trying to defeat these people in conversations and prove them wrong, which is kind of a carrot that's been dangled in front of us, the way and this goes to the most basic tenets of how we're raised and how we kind of on an animalistic level perceive interactions with each other. But rather, it's how much you can learn from other people that helps to inform you, inform the way you talk about the things you believe in, inform the way that you understand those who may disagree, inform the way that both of those sentiments that might be seemingly disagreeable sentiments can work in harmony to inform problems, to inform solutions. An example of that sort of, when you talk about an economic issue and one person is very adamant that, well, corporate overreach, too much corporate power can be abused, can be used at the detriment of the common person, of the free enterprise, of the people, of the society at large. And that's true. There is absolutely an abuse of power or a potential abuse of power there that needs to be considered in policymaking. And yet, the thing that's seemingly in conflict with it, which is this idea that, hey, if you give the government all this regulatory power and you stifle these corporations, there's a potential of excess, there's a potential of inefficiency, there's a potential to undermine the industry's ability to compete, to undermine the entrepreneur's ability to prosper, to undermine, as a whole, the society's well-being. And these are all things that also need to be considered in good policymaking, and realizing that, hey, if you understand these different perspectives, understand these different ways that people are looking at these problems and these different problems that they're seeing within a greater issue, all of that helps to inform you. All of that helps to inform all of us. And we can come out of a conversation, if we come into it looking to learn, we can both be winners. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And overcoming that and realizing how much we have to learn, getting that curiosity, is essential to being able to get the most out of the conversations we engage in.
Okay, so I can get this I'll make it a very primitive
Please.
part to this. Instead of compromising, so because we both know in a compromise, one gives away their value for another value. Kind of think of things on a sliding scale to a degree. Take everything inside, see how it balances out in your ecosystem, correct? And if you get a balance from what has been presented to you, then you'll see that outcome. If you don't see the proper outcome to it, then that's when your guard could come up. Maybe give everybody equal right, free reign on what their belief is, and take their beliefs in and see where it measures up in your ecosystem, basically, right?
I mean, it's about considering different views, considering different ways of thinking about problems.
So
One
no
thing,
linear expression.
yeah. It's just kind of exploring the space and forming the way that we can internalize what is the problem and what can the solutions be. And I think there's one point you hit on that's really essential, which is this notion of the alternative to this conflict being compromise. I think now my book focuses primarily on this sort of social aspect, how we interact with each other. When you talk about the political manifestation, all of the ways we talk about politics on the electoral stage, I think it's really valuable to push back against this idea of compromise for the sake of compromise. When we have something we believe in deeply, something we care about so much, we should not compromise it because someone else wants something different. That is horse trading. It is compromising in the worst sense of undermining our values, our principles. What good compromise looks like, and what good compromise represents, at least as I see it, is policy that just takes these different perspectives in mind. If you go so far to one end, it is not that, well, one group's going to be unhappy about that. It is that they correctly point out that there is a potential for excess, error, abuse by skewing it so far in one direction. And the same will be true if you skew it too far in the other direction. And this is where we find somewhere to meet. Again, not to placate each other, but to understand that, well, all right, we need to keep these boundaries and these potential excesses in mind in a collaborative, collective problem-solving effort.
Okay. Now, you were a part of the Florida Forward experience as a state director of the Florida Forward Party. You worked in an environment defined by strong partisanship. What lessons did you take from that experience about building bridges across party lines?
So Forward is interesting because I think it is a party in itself. So this was not explicitly in the bridge building space, but some of our endorsees were. And some of our endorsees were independents, specifically running in one-party dominated districts. And the way to viably compete in areas like that is you build a coalition. You take sort of unrepresented independents, you take a minority party that is locked out of the viable political competition, and you take more and more of these alienated moderates from the party in power, and you try to build a coalition. And so building that coalition, you are never going to speak for everyone within a tent that broad. And what I've found so essential is this ethos that a few people, a few voices did have that I was lucky enough to interact with, of I'm not going to empower by speaking for all of the people. I'm going to empower by allowing the people to speak for themselves. And by creating these spaces, creating these avenues where people can feel heard, where people can feel themselves more of a part of the conversation. That's not always so easy to do, but it's pursuing that, and it's making sure that people feel heard, that people feel that their perspectives, that their voices are respected, that I think can give you that coalition support and that coalition strength.
Okay, I like that answer. Now, moving along, social media algorithms often reward outrage and confirmation bias. How can individuals and content creators like podcasters push back against that and foster more authentic engagement?
Well, I think, there's a piece of that which is podcasting, I would say can be an exception to that rule. The long form conversation lends itself much more to depth, nuance, exploration of difficult subjects in a thoughtful manner. And it can break from that norm that we expect of social media and new media. And there's a demand for it. I don't know if there is necessarily a way to compete with these sort of emotional messages on very quick content platforms, your TikToks and, X to a degree, your Blue Sky, where, and a great part of why we have this sort of discourse that we do is those kinds of media are in fact optimized or best suited for punchy emotional messaging that people are going to spread out of a sense of tribal loyalty or religious zealotry. That is going to work. And you may never get the same noise. You may never get the same traction on certain channels, but there is that demand, that hunger for something better, and that can be realized particularly through spaces like this. A lot of what I'm trying to do with the book is to escape from, my own political bubble, from this fear of where people are so immersed in the conflict and used to talking about it in a certain way, and present these tools, present, this call for a healthier dialogue as a means of self-empowerment, as a means of improvement, that you can become a better communicator, you can become a better you through this. And trying to cross over into that self-help space is, in a way, trying to find the media that is conducive to the thoughtful, the introspective, the curious, that I think is so needed within our political sphere.
Okay. Now, swinging back over to your book, after a reader finishes Common Ground from the ground up, what's one small practical step you hope they'll start to take in building common ground in their own communities?
Seek out conversations more with those who disagree. Have that curiosity. I think that is the primary motivator within all of this. All of the techniques that follow, all of the ways to kind of maximize, capitalize upon these opportunities to connect with others. Everything is founded upon being able to seek with genuine curiosity and wanting to understand different perspectives. These conversations with those outside of our bubble, outside of the ways that we're used to thinking about politics and the world. And if you have that curiosity, and I hope that that my readers do, I think that can take them a long way.
Okay. Now, before we finish up everything, one thing I'd like you to leave this audience with, and thank you for coming on and speaking all this out here into the world, because, like you said, this is an interesting topic. What would be the legacy that you want to leave behind after everything's all said and done and the dust clears?
Someone who fostered an intellectual curiosity and showed a better way than the conflict we're used to. If I can be part of that, if I can show, and one way I like to think about our politics is it's something of a finger trap. What I mean by that is we have all these arguments about how far we're willing to go, how hard we're willing to pull apart our relationships, pull apart, the fabric of our institutions and all of these principles we might have to resolve this conflict, to win this conflict. And it's a trap because all of those steps deepen the conflict. And it's a coming together that is not only the noble thing to do, it allows us to escape. It allows us to actually resolve the conflict, actually solve the problems in a more effective manner. It empowers us to have better leadership, to be better listeners, to be a better society. And if I can expose or be part of exposing politics and our way of thinking about politics as this finger trap that it is, I would be very happy and very proud to be a part
Now,
of
one
that.
thing we do on this show is we do we do this little bit about it's a shameless plug. Would you mind telling everybody where they can meet and greet you across the internet and where they can pick up your book, Nathan?
Oh, absolutely. You can find my book on most major online retailers. Easiest way is through Amazon. You can also find my site directly at nathansmolensky.com, where you can hopefully learn about my upcoming events, speaking engagements, how to get in touch with me, and all of that wonderful stuff.
All right, and we want to thank you very much for coming on WV Commonplace. And like always, audience, please listen to the outro. And the greatest thing about a podcast is the after effect of a podcast. Inside the show notes, that is a place where I encourage everyone to go, and you will be able to find everything that we talked about today here. And you have links to Nathan and everything that he's immersed in his universe. So on that note, I'm JR, and he's Nathan, and we are out of here.
Please follow WV Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at onecommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.
All right.